For the past 20 years, Lester Burke has managed a technology, vision, strategy, and successful implementation practice to help C suite leaders take all of the challenges they face in the IT space and turn those into actionable plans that enhance their companies. All sounds a little wonky, a little digital, a little impersonal, doesn't it? Well, nothing could be further from the truth of this man. Lester Burke is a successful businessman, but an equally successful husband, father, and friend. And he's a big man with an even bigger heart. His experience has not only changed the way he sees life, family, and leadership, I think it will also change the way you see those things as well. His TED style talk, You're Bigger Than You Think, is the process of learning the power of a lie, but the greater power of truth. Please welcome Lester Burke.
My story starts with the journey of my wife and I and our quest to get pregnant. We had been trying for over a year and we just weren't having any luck. Watching her come out of the bathroom with another negative test in her hand was just such a bummer. We had moved into our home after which felt like years of renovations. Our careers were moving along steadily, and we were just ready for this next step in our lives. My wife suggested we see some doctors, and we thought that was a great idea. Little did I realize how this decision would change my entire life. After some routine tests with the doctors, they determined I was the problem, which frankly surprises nobody, and they suggested I call my mom and get more information about my previous medical history. So I called my mom and I said, "Hey, mom, do you have any information you want to share on this?" And she suggested we meet and talk about it over lunch. Well, I thought that was a little weird. I didn't think much of it, and we agreed to meet for lunch the next weekend. I remember this day perfectly. It was a perfect fall day, 70 degrees. The sky still had that amazing amber fall color. We met my mom at Cheesecake Factory. I had the avocado egg rolls and a Coke, and the rest of us got our food. And I looked over to my mom and I said, "Well, what do you want to tell me?" She paused and looked down and looked back up, and she uttered the 9 words that would change my life forever. "Lester, you had cancer when you were very young." Initially, I was dumbfounded. I had no words. And then I had 1,000 questions. What? What kind of cancer? When? How long? Who else knew about this? And why didn't you tell me? At this point, I'm 35 years old, and this is the first I'm hearing of this. After a few deep breaths, my mom explained to me that they had found a tumor on my chest. We had surgery to get it removed, and that was followed by aggressive chemotherapy, one of the effects of which would be some fertility issues later in life. Lunch ended, and we drove home. My wife had 1,000 questions. Conversely, I barely remember getting home. Over time, more questions arose, and some answers too. I started counseling because I was angry and hurt, confused and disappointed. And I started speaking with some of my other siblings as well. I had always wanted to play football, follow along in the footsteps of my older brothers. And when the time came, I asked my parents if I could play. And the answer was no. And when I asked why, they said, "You're too small and skinny." However, that made no sense to me. See, I had always been one of the tallest kids in class. Every year, though, my parents gave me the same answer: "No, you're too small." I went through middle school and high school thinking I was one of the smaller kids. And it was so confusing hearing your parents say one thing, but then seeing something different. I even remember my father saying, "We're going to go to the gym. We're going to get you big and get some muscles on those bones." But that never changed their answer. Even to this day, I still work out all the time, trying to get bigger. As I continued on my journey, I realized more about the environment in which I was raised. I learned my father was a strong narcissistic personality, and my mother and my siblings and me had all suffered physical and mental abuse from him. And at that point, I began to realize my siblings and I were all trapped in the same lie. I was trapped out of a position of not knowing, whereas my siblings were trapped out of a position of fear. And in some ways, my mother was trapped in her own lie. You see, a lie can be a concession to one's own weakness. And whatever weakness my father perceived in himself resulted in a lie and a trap that his whole family was caught. This trap was large, and it kept me in prison for 30 years. Because once you're in this trap, it's really hard to see out of it and see clearly. When my mother told me on that day I had cancer when I was young, and I understood that my entire family had kept it from me for over 30 years, I was devastated. But on that day, she also handed me a key, and I used that key to get out of that trap and re-examine my reality. So how do we move forward from a life-altering lie? 1, understanding. As a parent, one of the things I fear most is my child being sick or being injured. I imagine my parents were terrified when they learned not only did I have cancer, I had to have surgery and chemotherapy for 2 years. They still had 3 other children to raise and their own jobs to deal with. I imagine at some point they were just trying to get from one day to the next. Maybe truth and transparency weren't at the top of their list. 2, empathy. When I think about my 13-year-old daughter, I see this little baby running back and forth in her crib, laughing and screaming and falling and having a ball. When I think of her 18-year-old sister, I see that one on the outside of the crib, leading the charge, running back and forth, laughing and screaming and falling down. And they're both full of love and light and energy, and it's beautiful. When I think of what my parents must have envisioned, I imagine they saw a very sick child, all from chemotherapy, skinny from not eating because everything tastes terrible, weak, low energy because chemo just makes you feel terrible all the time. That is not the child you want to put shoulder pads on and a helmet and throw them on a football field with all the big kids. And finally, forgiveness. When we talk about forgiveness, it sometimes feels like a cliche. But in all honesty, going down the path of forgiveness is much easier than staying on the path of resentment and anger. So that's what I did. Using those 3 tools helps me understand the past. But I have to move forward. I still have my own daughters to raise. I still have my own life to live. So what do we do to move forward? The first thing I commit to is not repeating the cycle of abuse and lying and trapping my own family and my own weaknesses. The second, I commit to my inner truth. I go to counseling so I can understand how this would have affected me, and I can understand and see more clearly my own triggers. And thirdly, I commit to truth externally. Despite the lie and despite the fertility issues, my wife and I were blessed with 2 amazing children. One, using in vitro fertilization, and the other one the old-fashioned way. Now, when that child comes and asks, Daddy, how did I get here? Guess what? We told her. We told her about the eggs and the sperm and the petri dish and how we mixed it all together and throw it back up in the womb. And we tell her she's amazing and that we love her very much and she's special. And off she goes. And guess what? Here's the best part. No big lie and no new family trap. So, after taking the time to listen to me today, and I thank you for that, I want you to reflect on the idea that a lie happens in a moment of weakness, but it can have an impact over a lifetime. But it doesn't have to be that way. If we choose to face our weakness by revealing our truth, we can make the change and break that cycle. So I will ask you, what is your biggest lie that you are holding on to? And who is it impacting the most? And what are you going to do about it? Thank you.